Now is the time, this is the hour. Ours is the magic, ours is the power. The movie stars 4 actresses. Rochelle, played by Rachel True. Sarah, played by Robin Tooney. Nancy, played by Farouza Balk. And last but not least, Bonnie, played by Neve Campbell. The story follows 3 friends that are part of a coven. They all practice witchcraft and they're looking for a 4th. So when Robin Tooney's character, Sarah, comes to town, they're immediately drawn to her. Sarah possesses natural powers, that of a natural witch. And as a 4th member of the group or a part of the coven, they'll become even more powerful and blessed with powers from nature. Now, these 3 witches get along swimmingly with the 4th. So they decide to call the corners north, south, east, and west, earth, air, fire, and water. When they do this, their hopes are to be blessed with powers from Manon. He is supposed to be the all-seeing, powerful God that blesses witches with powers. At the time when they were receiving their blessings for their powers, Nancy asked for all the powers of Manon. And since she was the very last to get it, the way her powers came were quite dark. She caused her stepfather or her mother's boyfriend to have a heart attack. And when he did, the payout they had from the heart attack, the insurance money, they were given money and they were able to spend it and get an apartment and move out of the hellhole that they lived in, a trailer park. So after that, Nancy was living the high life with her her mother, and things were going great until she got a little greedy. Now, as the story continues to progress, the girls get seduced by the darkness. They want more and they become hungry for more powers and are obsessed with using their powers in the wrong way. Sarah is usually the voice of reason, and she's telling the girls this is not a good idea and we probably shouldn't use our powers in this manner. It's easy to go down the rabbit hole when you're possessing these special abilities. Part of Nancy's problem was her jealousy. She didn't like the idea that Sarah was getting attention from a guy that treated her like trash. And Nancy decided to exact her revenge and hurt Sarah in the process. So she went to a party that she wasn't invited to. People are looking at her like she's super crazy because, hey, it's Nancy. She's actually one of my favorite characters. And funny thing, I was able to identify with Nancy the most. I always identify with freaks in movies. People who are more goth or a little darker and different from others. So Nancy goes to this party. She's unwelcome there. Obviously, people are looking at her terribly and they want her gone. She decides to go up and see Skeet Ulrich. I forgot his first name in the movie, but she goes and talks to him and she's like, hey, I see you're with Sarah. Like, what are you doing? And he's drunk out of his mind. And she decides while there, she wanted to get revenge. So her way of getting revenge was to disguise herself like Sarah, make a move on him, and when Sarah entered the room to stop them from happening, Nancy turned and killed him. She used her powers and he was flung off of the balcony and fell to his death. So when this happened, of course, Sarah is now terrified of Nancy. And not only that, but Rochelle and Bonnie, they're on Nancy's side and they're acting like nothing ever happened. So this caused a lot of friction in the friendship. They're, hiding this murder. And Sarah is still on the outside because these girls want to have fun with the powers that they have. And every time they're using their powers, they're getting darker and deeper into black magic. These girls are easily becoming the witches of the school. They're taking over and causing a lot of trouble. Also using their powers in the bad way, which is to manipulate others around them. So while this is happening, again, Sarah is stepping up and saying we shouldn't be doing this. After a while, they get annoyed with how Sarah is acting like a goody two-shoes and she's ruining the fun for them. They decide to retaliate, but with every devious action, there are consequences. And they soon learn that later on when they play a horrible, cruel trick on Sarah. So Sarah was pretty much given a cold shoulder from her coven, and they were trying to freeze her out. They didn't want her there. Sarah took an approach to bind Nancy's powers instead because Nancy was becoming reckless with her powers and dangerous. So when Sarah did that, Nancy already felt that this was happening because she is part of the coven. That made Nancy retaliate and turn the other girls against Sarah. Sarah decided to stay away from them. While she was doing so, Nancy wasn't finished. Nancy decided to get Bonnie and Rochelle, and they went to Sarah's house and decided to torment her. They did so by tricking her and letting Sarah know that her parents died in a horrible plane crash. They're like, turn on the news and check it out. This was a glamour, and it was used to trick Sarah, and Sarah believed it because she was dealing with a lot of things. Her mother died, and she also attempted to unalive herself at one point. So she had a dark past, and she was carrying that around with her, and her friends in turn used it against her. To torment Sarah even further, Bonnie, Rochelle, and Nancy went to Sarah's house, and they decided to use all of her fears against her. Sarah hated bugs and snakes and creepy crawly things. She proved that when they were calling the four corners of earth, air, fire, and water, and Nancy had a snake, and Sarah didn't take too keen about it. I don't like snakes either, so I totally get where Sarah was coming from. So they decided to fill her house with these creepy crawly things, snakes, bugs, rats, roaches, you name it. Anything you could think of, tons of mealworms everywhere. And she is trapped. She can't leave her house because all of these things are happening. And the three witches use a glamour to mess with Sarah's head. While Sarah was vulnerable, they slit her wrists and decided to unalive her, to remove her from the coven altogether. Because this coven, instead of nature-loving witches, they decided to go dark and use black magic. When this happened, Sarah was laying on the floor, breathing her last few breaths, and she decided to invoke the powers of Manon. When she did so, she was blessed and given powers beyond measure. It's like she was stronger than the entire coven put together. She used their dirty parlor tricks against them, and they were finally able to break down. She had an epic fight with Nancy, which I loved, and she triumphed. The moral of the story is they were forced to confront the darkness that was within themselves, hence why they were using their powers and being so aggressive and negative towards Sarah. There was something within them that they no longer liked or found attractive. I love the craft simply because it was about teen girls. They were in their clique and in their group, and they were doing their thing with Wicca, and I was drawn to it. I also loved Nancy as a character because she was completely insane, and I just loved her punk rock, don't give a F attitude. On top of that, the soundtrack was dope. Pretty much every song on there I love, and the craft brings back so many good memories from the 90s, which I love the 90s. Honestly, if I could go back, I totally would. But it was just a great movie all in all. The flow of it, the writing was pretty good, and the effects were great for that time period. Now, as for the craft legacy, I didn't particularly care for it. It was okay. I thought that honestly they shouldn't have made a legacy, but the little twist at the end to me was expected because of the way things were said and the way the main character looked. I don't want to ruin that one for you in case you want to check it out, but I wish, honestly, the writing could have been better. Special effects could have been better, and I wish they'd use more magic. I mean, it is called the Craft Legacy, so I wanted to see some of the same type of magic that was in the first one that made it, a classic and catapulted it to where it is and made it a cult classic. So I thought that with Legacy, they would have been able to continue that. And a lot of the other actresses did not return for Legacy, which I'm curious of. And I was curious as to why, because I think that would have been a great bridge to introduce or usher in that new movie. For the main character, Sarah, she was well done. Regarding character development, Sarah had a dark past. She tried to unalive herself a few times, and the second time she almost succeeded. And she has a strained relationship with her father, although they seem sort of close. She's quite guarded because she's still dealing with the loss of her mother. And Sarah is plucked out of her environment and then taken to a new town. She's in LA, and she's going to a new school with richer kids, and kids that are not really like she is. She feels different, kind of isolated. And when she meets these three other girls, you know, Bonnie, Rochelle, and Nancy, she's automatically drawn to them because she thinks that they're cool and she could probably fit in if she hangs around them. Their relationship starts off great. They're hanging out, learning about the craft, learning about Wicca and understanding what magic is. And it appears that her friends are good and they're respecting, the laws of nature. However, later on you come to see that they take it to a dark place and actually start dabbling into dark magic. I think Sarah had a defining moment when they called the corners north, south, east, and west. When that happened in the aftermath, they showed the whales and sea creatures that washed up on the shore, and she was starting to think maybe she got a little too far into it. She didn't quite know how to accept it, but she knew something was a little dark behind what they did. So Sarah was still trying to process everything, and when she was using her powers to manipulate others around her, it's kind of sad because she was feeling maybe like she shouldn't be a part of this group. However, she really wanted to be. So I think that she wrestled with herself, wondering how she should handle it. And things were going great so far until Nancy became really obsessed with being all powerful and dominating the group and using the other two as lackeys. Now, we saw that Sarah did some really nice things for her friends. She did use her magic for Rochelle when the other girl was being racist towards her. And Nancy being the antagonist that Nancy is, I just adore Nancy. But Fairuza Balk as an actress too. But Nancy took it to such a dark place in the movie. She was obsessed with being all powerful and dominating her friends. And she saw goodness in Sarah, and she really didn't like that Sarah was super good and naive. Nancy was dealing with being hurt all the time. Apparently something happened with her and the guys at school while they were calling her slutty. And she didn't really quite know how to handle it, so everyone became an enemy to her. And you saw her character, she was bad anyway, but you saw her character getting worse when she got obsessed with controlling everything. And you thought that maybe when she left the trailer park that she would become, better and happier, but things actually took a turn for the worse because she was seduced by that darkness and she wanted more. And she didn't like the idea that Sarah wasn't listening to her, or her friends, or Sarah wasn't obeying her, but her other two lackey friends, they were terrified of her. So I think that with Nancy's character as a villain, an ultimate villain in the movie, she shined. She definitely did. And for her to be able to have that, showdown, that huge fight scene, and tackle Sarah and do all those things, and then sadly end up in a mental institution. Nancy was exactly where she belonged. She was not stable, not emotionally stable whatsoever. My top 4 favorite scenes in The Craft are definitely when they called the corners, and all the sea life washed up to the shore and Nancy walked on water. I definitely loved the time where Sarah invoked Mano and took on Nancy, which I thought was really cool. Best fight scene ever. I like the initial scene when all 4 girls were seen walking through the hall. They did their bitch walk, the popular girls, the coven, to watch out for at school. And lastly, I like the scene with Nancy at the bus stop. One of my favorite scenes, because just being different and letting people know that you are a weirdo, you're quite different. It shocks some people, but it's good to embrace your individuality. So let me know in the comment section which part of the movie is your favorite, and what great memories does The Craft bring back for you?
Watch out for those weirdos.
We are the weirdos, mister.